question. I feel like we're just getting going. I want to, as always, just a little bit remind us, we're on a journey here, looking through these each week, focusing on a different thinker and their writings on emunah, their writings on faith. And part of the work that I want to do today with our final text that we're going to read is like sort of bring it all together and pick up some of the pieces on the thread. So I want to, as I've been doing, just sort of remind us of some of the key ideas that we've seen. So you remember back a few weeks ago, we started with the Eish Kodesh with Rabbi Kalonymus Kalman Shapira. And one of the things that he wrote about is he brought in that midrash from Shemot Rabbah, from Exodus Rabbah, where Moshe says, God says, bring the people out. And Moshe says to God, well, what if they don't believe me? And God in the midrash almost sort of yells at Moshe and says, like, these are my people. They're going to believe you. If they're not believers themselves, they're the children of believers. Him maminim or him b'nei maminim. If they're not believers themselves, they're the children of believers. And so one of the things that the Eish Kodesh was saying there is that belief is something that we inherit. Faith is something that we inherit. He also, in that same drasha, you'll remember, he says that faith is like an unconscious thing that happens in our body that is necessary. It is like breathing. It is like loving. It is like our heart beating, and it just happens even if we're not aware of it, because it's just inherited. He does say that faith is also a practice, that we can then draw consciousness and focus to that faith, and then we can grow that. But that there is a certain amount of faith that is just sort of operating in the background always. So that's the Eish Kodesh. We then moved on to Rabbi Nachman, and one of the things we saw in Rabbi Nachman, you might have thought that faith is just about belief, and he says, no, faith is not just about belief. But sometimes even when we can't get ourselves to that place of belief, faith can be just about speaking the thing. Faith can be just about saying the words, just saying it. That is an aspect of faith. And then he even said in a different writing in Sichot Oran, he even said, and if sometimes you can't get yourself to that place of speech, maybe you're just in the place of wailing or crying or mourning. He says even just that crying to God, that crying out to God is also an aspect of faith. That faith is actually sort of much more expansive than we might have expected. But that really, it's about faith for Rabbi Nachman. It's not only about belief. Faith is about the choice to remain in relationship. And that as long as we are remaining in relationship, that we're speaking those words to God, that we're crying those words to God, even with all of our doubt and our loss and our questions and our despair, as long as we're in relationship with God, he would say that's an aspect of faith. And then last week, we moved on to the 19th century Musar thinker, Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel. And he brought the pasuk, he brought the verse, V'tzadik be'emunato yichiyeh, the righteous person through their faith will live. We said that this was similar to what we saw in Rabbi Nachman, that Rabbi Nachman was saying, someone who doesn't have faith, their life is not a life. If they do have faith, their life is a life. So there was something similar in what Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel, he was saying that actually the key to life is faith. That is through our faith that we experience life. And Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel says, and what is life? Life is like the quality of life that Adam Rishon, that Adam had in the Garden of Eden. Life means really like living the fullest life, meriting all of this goodness and all of this delight. And he says the way that we get there is through our faith. And then he goes on to say, and something that for him, what faith is faith is the knowledge. It's the certainty that even in the darkest of times, it is actually through the darkest of times, it is through despair that the Mashiach will come, that the Messiah will come, that there will be salvation, that there will be hope. That faith is about believing with certainty that it is actually precisely in darkness and through darkness that we get to the hope, that we get to the salvation. And then he connected that at the end to prayer, and specifically to the language of saying amen, amen, connected to emunah, that like the language of prayer is all in the present tense, and amen is like affirming. Every time we say amen, it's an act of faith and saying in the present tense, I believe that God is active and working in this world. Maybe even if I don't believe it, maybe even if I don't see it, I'm going to say it in the present tense. This is a little bit like Rabbi Nachman. I'm going to like say the thing. That's an aspect of faith. I'm going to say the thing because every act of prayer, every time that we say amen to a blessing that's written in the present tense, that is an act of faith that we are saying, I believe that God is still active and operating in this world. Okay, so that was the Eish Kodesh to Rabbi Nachman to Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel. That's our journey so far. This week, we're going to be looking at potentially as many as 2 modern midrashim from a collection of midrashim called Dir Shuni, and 1 modern poem. Oh, good. We're getting some clapping from Deb. I know CSB has a real history with Dir Shuni. So some of you are probably familiar. Some of you perhaps it's new. I'll give you a little bit of an intro to Dir Shuni. Let's just grab all of the Dir Shuni books off my bookshelf. So Dir Shuni is a collection. Dir Shuni is a collection of midrashim written by modern Israeli women. It was originally published in 2 different Hebrew volumes. Dir Shuni. You actually can get the Hebrew volumes in America, though they're easier to get in Israel. And then recently, I think they were already available by the time you did your scholar in residence in this past January you had it, was it? Or was it a year ago already? It was a while ago. It was last January, I think. Wow, yeah. So it was like last January that you had it. And then I think in June of last year, they came out with the English version, which I'm sure so many of you have. And one of the co-editors and one of the writers of these midrashim is Tamar Biala, who I think you might have even done a thing with Tamar Biala with CSB, who is just a very important person in my life and a teacher of mine. And so I had originally planned to bring you one particular midrash from Dir Shuni from today, and it just happens that I was meeting with Tamar Biala, one of the editors and writers of Dir Shuni, yesterday, and she shared with me a new midrash that is not published in one of these 2 volumes. It's not even out in the world yet, by Rivka Lubitch, who's one of the main contributors of Dir Shuni. And this midrash, the title of the midrash is perfect for us. It's called Midrash Emunah, and a midrash of faith. And I learned this midrash yesterday, and I said, I must share this with you all today. It's a gorgeous midrash, and I think amazingly, like I couldn't have planned it better myself, ties together so much of the learning we're doing. So we're going to start with that midrash Emunah. Then we're going to move on to a poem by Yehuda Amichai, Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, and then we'll maybe have time to do see another midrash from Dir Shuni at the end of class. Okay, so you have the source sheet in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Okay, I'll just make it a bit bigger for us. Okay, so Rivka Lubitch, besides being a tremendous scholar, very steeped in Jewish learning and text, besides writing midrashim, she's contributed many midrashim to the multiple volumes of Dir Shuni, which, by the way, Tamar is actually working on a 3rd volume, which is amazing news for the world. Rivka Lubitch is also a rabbinic advocate in Israel that specifically advocates mostly for and on behalf of women, like issues relating to women's issues in Jewish law. Okay, and this is called Midrash Emunah. Dor Rishon Anshe Emunah Hayu. The first generation, they were people of faith. So who are the first generation? We're talking about like the earliest people in our history. I assume we're talking about like maybe Noah, Abraham. Umahi Emunato Shel Dor Rishon. What was the faith of that first generation? Emunah Lishon Emet. Their faith coming from the language, from the meaning of the word emunah that's connected to emet. One of the sort of root meanings of the word emunah is truth. Like even when we say the word amen, part of what we're saying is like, indeed, it's true, or that's true for me. That one of the meanings of emunah is truth. So what was the faith of the first generation? It was a faith that was all about truth, that was about emet. Shira'u et Hashem ve'et niflotav b'yam suf ve'yadu emet le'amito, that when they saw God and they saw God's wonders at the Red Sea, they saw sort of the truth of all truths, shehashem hu Elohim, and they saw in truth that God is the God. The Hotzienu miMitzrayim, the Kara lanu et hayam, that God brought us out of Egypt and parted for us the sea. Ke'isha haro'a et chevrata ve'yodat kashemesh b'tzorayim shehi chaya v'kayemet. In the same way, like a woman who sees her friends and knows like the sun, like the clearest of the sun, that she is alive and she is standing before her. So what was the faith of the first generation? The first generation, they saw God. They saw and knew God directly. So their faith was not, in a sense, their faith wasn't a profound faith. Their faith was like, here is God. I see God. This is the God that brought me out of Egypt. This is the God that parted me the sea. This is the God that revealed God's self directly to us in the wilderness, that this is the God that was on Sinai with us. I see this God. And the same way that I experience my friend in real life standing before me, and I see that person and I say, here's my friend standing before me. That was their relationship to God, a God that was revealed and immediate and present in their lives. And there was no denying God's presence, because God's presence was simply there and God was true. So what was emunah for them? Emunah was truth. It was simply what was true. It wasn't a leap of faith. It was, I see God clear as day and I see the evidence of God in my life. How do we know that? Shene'emar, as it says, Vayir'u ha'am et Hashem, v'ya'aminu ba'Hashem u'Moshe avdo, that the people saw God and they believed in God and in Moshe, God's servant. I just want to point out, there's another midrash in Dershuni that plays with this relationship here, but the word vayir'u is a little bit of a tricky word, because the shorish, the root of this word, it can be either the people saw, but it's also connected to the root for yir'ah, like the people were in awe of, or the people feared God. So there's sort of this relationship between seeing and having the experience of being in yir'ah of God, of having awe or fear of God. So here, I think the meaning is vayir'u ha'am et Hashem, that the people saw God, and their ability to see God sort of like in real time, to see God revealed in the world. This led them to faith, a faith that was all about true, because it was just simply what was true for them. And they believed in God and they believed in God's servant. Meaning what? Hainu ra'u, hainu he'eminu, hainu yadu. Meaning they saw, they believed, and they knew. Sort of like what a beautiful, sort of like simple faith of the Dor Rishon of the first generation. God revealed God's self in the world. God performed these miracles. God brought them out in this immediate, direct way. And all the people needed to do is they saw God. Like they saw God the same way that we experience and see people in our lives. And that's allowed them to believe. And their faith was a faith of certainty, that they like knew with certainty. So that was the Dor Rishon. Dorot Emseim, Afhem She'emunah Hayu. The middle generations, these were also generations of faith. It'll be interesting to come back to this question. I feel, to me, like the Dor Rishon, the first generation, has to be like Abraham, Moshe, the people at Sinai. That has to be the first generation. It'll be an interesting question who you think the Dorot Emseim, who are the middle generations that Midrash is talking about. Dorot Emseim, Afhem Anshe Emunah Hayu. These middle generations, they were also people of faith. Ketzad, how is it? How could it be that they were people of faith? They didn't see God, and they didn't see God's wonders. Ele emunah lishon emun, shehayu notnim miftacham beemunat avotehem veimotehem, sheHashem hu Elohim. That the word of emunah their emunah comes from the meaning of emunah that is about trust. That they would put their trust in the faith of their ancestors and their fathers and in their mothers, that God was the God. Vehu asher hotzi'am memitzrayim v'kara lahem et hayam. And this was the God that brought them out of Egypt and split for them the sea. So just noticing there in the Midrash, that in the first part of the Midrash, they said they simply saw God. They saw God's wonders, v'hotzi'enu memitzrayim. And God was the God that directly, first person, brought them out. They experienced God immediately in their lives, so that there was no question about God. This generation, they didn't have the benefit of seeing God directly. And so what was their faith? Their faith wasn't about truth. They didn't know it to be true because they didn't see it and experience God with their own eyes. Rather, their faith was the definition of faith that's connected to trust, that they had to trust. And they put their trust in their ancestors, because this was the God that brought them, Hotzi'am, brought them out of Egypt and split for them the sea. Natnu emun be'Elohim b'ma she'asa u'b'ma she'tid la'asot. And they put their trust in God, in what God did, and in what God in the future would do. That's actually an interesting leap that I think the Midrash makes, that on the one hand, it's saying that for the middle generations, what does it mean for them to be people of faith? It's not plain as day for them. It's not just sort of about like the truth, faith as about truth, because I saw it with my own eyes. I saw it, I believed, I knew. But faith is about connecting to our ancestors and sort of this trust of like, well, this must be the God that brought you out. So faith is about something that extends backward. But interestingly, it seems at the same time for this middle generation, the faith not only extends backward, it also extends forward. That faith is not only about faith in what God did, even though it wasn't for me, it was for previous generations, but that then pulls me somehow into the future, in the future, what God will do. Ve'elu hayu omrim, and they would say, this middle generation, ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema be'biyat HaMashiach. They would say, I believe with full faith in the coming of the Mashiach. This, anytime you hear this language of ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema, it sort of like brings up Maimonides. The Rambam has these 13 principles of faith, things that we are to believe wholeheartedly. So this middle generation, they believed with a wholehearted faith in the coming of Mashiach, the coming of the Messiah, the perfected world. The afal pisha yitmameha, even though the Mashiach is slow to come, the Messiah is like waiting or taking his time. In kol ze echakelo bechol yom sheyavo. In any case, I will wait for him for every day that he will come. Okay, so this middle generation, what was the faith of the middle generation? Their faith was a faith that wasn't about what is true, what they knew with certainty, because this was a generation that didn't get to see, didn't get to experience, but their faith was a faith that was about just trusting. And this trust amazingly brought them to a place of emunah shlema, a full-hearted faith. Dor acharon, the last generation, afhu karui anshe emunah. This generation is also called people of faith. So again, I would ask you the question, I wonder which is the middle generation? And now it's saying the last generation. I wonder who is the last generation? I think certainly we have to be included in the last generation. It's interesting that she's chosen the language of Dor Acharon, like the last generation, so there's not a generation after us. Like this is just the state, like what I wonder for this Midrash is, what we're seeing in the Midrash is an evolution of the experience of faith. Is like, is this the last evolution, or might there be some experience of faith, the next step of faith that comes down the line? But right now, Dor Acharon, Afu Karui Anshe Emunah, the last generation, they are also called people of faith. Haketzad, how is it? V'harei Dor Zeh meharher echar emet, umerher echar emunatehem shel avotav ve'imotav. How could it be that this generation is called a people of faith? Because this generation, they question the truth. And they question the faith of their fathers and their mother. This is a generation, it continues to say, ve'eino noten emun b'davar. They don't trust anything, right? At least the middle generation, they didn't see with their own eyes, but that was a generation that trusted. They trusted. Their ancestors said, this is the God that brought us out. So they said, okay, this is the God that brought them out. They were able to take that on. But this last generation, how could this generation be called anshe emunah, people of faith? They doubt everything. They question everything. They're skeptical about everything, right? They're trying to undo everything. They don't have trust in anything. How could a generation like that be believers? It's interesting. So I just want to like bring up for you the language of, we had on Eish Kodesh in the first week. Eish Kodesh said, God forbid someone is at a place where they're feeling, the Eish Kodesh said, when we're feeling happy, when things are good in our life, then we believe with certainty. But when we're broken, God forbid, we might come to a place of saying, I don't believe, right? Rabbi Nachman is also talking about what happens when you get to a place of don't believe. So here, and the Midrash is saying, how could it be this generation that questions everything? How could it be that this generation would be a generation of believers? Rather, their faith comes from the language of umnut, of caretaking. Omnim hem et Elohim ve'et Torato. They care for God and they care for God's Torah. Umigadlim umitabchim otam ad shenaseh Hashem leElohim. And they take care of God's Torah. They raise God and they sort of rear them up until God becomes God and God's Torah, v'torato na'aset leTorah. So another meaning, another like linguistic meaning of the word emun, the root can also mean, in the same way that the root can mean like truth, it can also mean to affirm, but it can also mean to support. So normally we think of support of like, yeah, like I affirm, like the language of Amen. That's true for me. I affirm that for me. I support what you're saying. Also count that for me. But another meaning of the word support is to take care of. And an omen in the Torah is also a word that's sort of like used for a caregiver or a nurse, someone that cares for babies, because an omen is someone that supports and lifts up. So that's another word. So they're saying the faith of the last generation, that's a faith that's about caregiving. How? Because they care for God and God's Torah, and they raise up God's Torah until God becomes God and God's Torah becomes Torah. It's a very strong statement, which is to say that before they care for God, that perhaps God is not God and God's Torah is not Torah, that there's some action that the people are doing that's sort of like raising God up. Shene Emar, as it says, Ka'asher yisah ha'omen et hayonek. As the omen, so this is the word that I was talking about, you could see in that the root aleph mem nun, as the caregiver or the nurse raises up the yonek, the babe. So that there's this, you see here that the word omen can be someone who is like caregiving or supporting, and they're literally raising up the babe. And it seems like that's what this last generation is doing to God. Shehayonek noten emun be'omen. You can see here the linguistic wordplay that's happening. The baby gives emun, trust, to the omen, to the caregiver. The ha-omen, the caregiver, omen et hayonek, and the caregiver takes care of the baby, mitapcho umigadlo ve'ohavo. And the role of the caregiver is to nurture her and to raise her up and to love her. So what is this last generation? The first generation, their faith was a faith that was about emet, the connection of the word emunah to truth. The first generation was, they didn't have to like their faith was not about belief. It was about certainty and knowing. They saw, they believed, they knew. The middle generation, they were a step removed. They didn't have the direct relationship with God. They weren't directly brought out themselves, but they had trust in God. The third generation, it seems like the third generation doesn't have trust in anything. The third generation's faith is not about trust. They might have been even the people that would have said, I don't believe, because they don't believe in that same way. So what's their faith? And Rivka Lubitch wants to say, also those people, even the people that question and doubt and don't trust anything, they also have faith. What is their faith? Their faith is connected to the root of the word emunah, that's about caretaking. What is the way in which they have faith? Their faith is about choosing to care for God, to love God, to raise God up. And through this act of caregiving, of being the omen, we are the caregivers. God becomes God and God's Torah becomes Torah. Okay, let me pause there. I'm curious to hear, what do you think Rivka Lubitch is the author of this midrash? What is Rivka Lubitch, what is she teaching us about faith? What is she teaching us about faith, and why do you think she's offering, what's the offering that she's giving us here? And I'm curious to hear how it resonates with you, how it lands with you. So you can officially, great, start putting these in the chat. So Kathleen says, going back to the first generation, they saw, they believed, and how long before they built the golden calf? How could they see, have faith, and forget so quickly? So that, Kathleen, that's an amazing question. You're saying, on the one hand, like Dora Rishon, the first generation, the Midrash is painting their faith as being a faith of certainty. Like they had it all. It was true. It's so amazing. Like what if, and maybe some of you are blessed to have this experience with God in your life, but what if your relationship with God was as like, in the same way that I see my friend and my friend is standing there, I experience God in my life in that sort of like clear as day kind of way. And this is saying that the first generation had that, which makes sense that they would have that. And even then, Kathleen, how quickly they forget. And so then what I would say about that is like, and all the more so for us, if the first generation saw God, had that kind of certainty of God, and they still had that sort of like lapse in their faith, all the more so I think it speaks to how hard it is in the later generations, in the middle generation, and the last generation, that wasn't starting from that place of certainty. Okay, thank you for bringing that in. Right, so Kathleen, you wrote, if the first generation cannot hold on to their faith, what is the hope of our generation? So so I'm going to come back to that. I want to hear that from you. I think this midrash, for me, I feel like this midrash is offering a lot of hope for our generation. And I guess my question to you is, what is it offering to us? And do you feel like, I don't know, does it resonate with you? So Ruth said, the act of nursing the next generation is the ultimate act of faith. So Ruth, that's so interesting. I think that the midrash was talking about the omen, like us as being the omen, the caregiver, specifically for God. That if we were nursing anyone or caring for anyone, what we are caring for is God, is that our act of faith is caring for and raising up God. And God becomes, there's actually a Yehuda Amichai poem that we're not going to look at today, but that Yehuda Amichai sort of talks about the cyclical cycle of prayer, in that God created man, and man created prayers, and prayers created God, and God created man. Sort of like he talks about the cycle. So in a sense, I think that poem is connected to this, that the thing that we are, our expression of faith for God is not about sort of a certainty of knowing God, or not even necessarily a trusting in God, but a choice to care for God. But Ruth, so beautiful, you're saying actually there's another act of caring or faith that we're doing, which is not just the faith that's about caring for God, it's the faith that's about nursing or bringing up the next generation. So you're just offering us another way to think about that nursing imagery. Thank you so much for that, Ruth. Deb says, there are many different ways to show and have faith. Right, yeah, so I think that's just totally true, Deb, that's part of what's coming out of this midrash. In the same way that I think we've been seeing in our learning together, that the word emunah, it's come up, like, well, what do I mean when I say faith? And what are all the different meanings that can be attained by the word faith? And is faith about certainty? Is faith about trust? Is faith about belief? What do I have to believe in? Is it about a practice? Is it, as Rabbi Nachman was saying, faith is maybe not only about belief, but even just speaking the thing is an aspect of faith, or crying is an aspect of faith. What Deb is pointing out, and what I think this midrash is saying, is actually all of these things are, even for the last generation, who clearly doesn't believe anything and doesn't trust in anything and just has questions and doubts, there's still a generation of faith, and their faith just looks differently. For me, that brings it back to the Eish Kodesh, the God forbid, even for the people who would say, I don't believe, God forbid to say that you don't believe, you do believe. And I feel like this is sort of saying the same thing. It's saying, even for the people that would think that they don't believe, it might be that you're not a believer by the first generation standards, and maybe you're not a believer by the second generation standards, but maybe you're a believer by the third generation standards. Maybe it's just we need a more expansive understanding of what it means to believe, and then there's space for more people in there. So Anita says, faith is in our DNA, no matter where we are in the development. The first generation, then those who follow, and those who come after with no clear-cut evidence. How much stronger if we can find it within ourselves, now being so far removed. Right, so Anita, this feels very Eish Kodesh to me. Faith is in our DNA, like that faith is not dependent upon us, that faith is something that's handed down to us, that it's just inside us. It might manifest and take different forms, or we might be in different relationships to our faith, but that faith is we are just people of faith. And so Rivka doesn't bring this explicitly, but when Rivka is talking about the first generation being called a generation of faith, and the second generation, I just so much hear in that the language of the midrash from Shemot Rabbah that we learned with the Eish Kodesh the first week. Oh, if they're not believers, they're children of believers. I think that when we first read that Eish Kodesh, I find that Eish Kodesh very powerful. The first one that we read, if they're not believers, they're children of believers, because I take that to mean, okay, even if I don't feel like a believer in any given moment, it's assuring me, don't worry, you are a believer, that belief is inherited. It's, as you were saying, Anita, the faith is in our DNA. But I think you still could have said, I think that I find that resonant, but I think someone else could say no, I'm not a believer. Don't tell me my parents are believers, so I'm a believer. I don't feel like I'm a believer in the moment. I don't feel that I have that belief. And I think this midrash is offering an answer to that. I've been saying well, what does it mean to be a children of a believer? it doesn't mean that your belief looks the same as the previous generation. It doesn't mean that your belief is the same. You don't have the same relationship to God as your parents or as your grandparents, but you could actually be you could be a child of a believer and just have a very different relationship to your faith. Your belief could take a different shape. And that, to me, I find very powerful. If there are moments in my life where I'm feeling like, I don't know if I can say I believe in sort of like the traditional understandings of knowing with certainty, with truth as clear as day, that, well, maybe the problem is not that I don't believe or not a lack of faith, but I have to expand my notion of what it means to believe. That, and here what she's offering is belief can be about a choice to care and to love and to prioritize and to raise up, that maybe that's the way we believe. And if that's the definition of belief, then I definitely believe. It's like all of us on this call, we believe, because we're all making the choice to care and to raise up and to prioritize. Okay. So Deborah says, I'm not certain about this linear explanation. With practice, I believe I can directly experience God in my life today. Okay, Deborah, I love this. Thank you so much for saying this. I think this is such a great comment. Right, yeah, it does seem like there's a linear trajectory in this midrash of inevitably in the later generations that are more distant and removed, that we just can't, it seems like this midrash is saying we just can't have this kind of faith or relationship to faith that first generation had. So this is affirming we still have faith, we're still people of faith, but our faith is going to look different. And Deborah, you're saying, I don't know about that. Maybe it's like, maybe I'm in the third generation, but maybe I can actually get myself, maybe in the third generation, maybe I can get myself to the place of the second generation. Maybe I start in the third generation and I'm in a place of not trusting and really faith being about sort of caretaking and prioritizing and raising up and choosing to love. But maybe through that practice, I can get myself to a place of trust. And maybe through that, I can actually get myself to a place of feeling as if I really saw it directly. So Deborah, I really appreciate that. So both the question of, does the midrash end here? Is there a generation after us? Is there another evolution to faith? And also perhaps it's not so linear. Perhaps we can sort of like jump categories. And maybe there are people in our generation that are in this Dor Acharon, this last generation, and they don't at all identify with the last generation. Maybe some of you on the call feel like, actually, I'm in the first generation. I do feel God's place in my life sort of as certainty, as true as if I'm looking at my friend. And I think that that's a really important thing to affirm. Thank you so much for that, Deborah. So Kathleen says, faith has to be the ultimate individual choice. I choose to believe. I also choose to share that faith, to give the next generation some hope and some reason to believe. Yeah, so I think that that's right for this midrash, Kathleen. Faith is not about feeling, is it? I don't know. So that's what feels so complicated. I think some people could say faith has everything to do with feeling. What do we feel? But Kathleen, I totally hear you. And I think that the midrash supports you here, that faith is about a choice. I'm choosing to care. I'm choosing to raise up. I'm choosing to prioritize. Even if I don't have a different relationship to trust and belief. Okay. Okay, so thank you for that. I guess where I just want to leave us with this midrash is there's a teaching, it's not quite a teaching, but if any of you are familiar with The Little Prince, The Little Prince is one of my favorite books. The little prince who goes off, he leaves his rose on his planet and goes off sort of in search of other planets and other life. And then on Earth, he meets a fox. And the fox requests that the little prince come back at a certain time every day in order to tame him. And the fox teaches the little prince about what it means to be in relationship and what it means for one person to tame another person. And it's like this beautiful meaning of the word tame. That's about a choice to be in relationship. And the fox says, because you have tamed me, I will come at every day at this exact time. I will come to expect you. And this moment will be special to me because you've made me special and I've made you special. And I've always felt that about, that feels to me very resonant with how I think about Torah, of that there is, Kathleen, as you were saying, that there's a choice, that it's we make a choice to care and to love. And then through that, the relationship comes. And so here, this is a different offering of, faith can be about a lot of things. Faith can be about emet, it can be about truth and certainty. Faith can be about placing a trust, even if you don't have that kind of certainty. And faith can be about, even if you don't have that truth, even if you don't have that trust, faith can be about a choice. Faith can be about an act to care and to raise up. Okay, we're gonna go on. I'm gonna go back into screen sharing. I wanted to share with you this poem by Yehuda Amichai, Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. I wasn't one of the 6 million. I think the Eish Kodesh, if we can go back really to the very first piece of Eish Kodesh we looked at, I think we looked at the Eish Kodesh, we looked at the Eish Kodesh of the spies, that the spies come back and say, I don't know about this, like the land is great, but the people are strong and the land is fortified and the cities are large. And then what the Eish Kodesh says there is, what faith is you have to say the thing that is true and hard, and then mikol makom ani ma'amin. And then in any event, despite that, I believe. And something that we talked about in that first session is like, that's all well and good, but what if you can't get yourself to the place of the I believe? What if you're still in the place of the things feel hard? Or, as the Eish Kodesh was saying, sometimes when you're in a place of happiness and certainty, your faith comes easily. And sometimes when you're broken, your faith, you feel like, he would say, chas v'shalom, eino ma'amin, I don't believe. And he's saying you have to believe anyway. And I want to offer this poem as okay, but what if actually you really can't get yourself to that place of, you can't get yourself as in the language of the Midrash, you can't get yourself to that place of certainty with God, of the first generation, of really feeling like you're seeing God in the world. And what happens if you're the second generation and you can't even get yourself to that place of trust with God? What if you can't get yourself to the mikol makom ani ma'amin? In any event, I believe. What do you do then? So here's this poem by Yehuda Amichai. Ani ma'amin. So I'll read it first just once through in the Hebrew. You'll forgive my Hebrew, specifically Cheryl, you'll forgive my Hebrew, and then I'll give it to you in the English, but just so that we can hear a little bit of it. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema. So again, I just want to point out, that's that echoing. We saw that even in the Midrash. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema. I believe with perfect faith. That's a hearkening back to the Rambam, to Maimonides, of like the 13 principles of faith that every person has to believe. So Yehuda Amichai is using that religious language of the Maimonides and saying, here's what I believe with perfect faith. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema, shebarega zeh, omdim milyonei b'nei adam b'tzamtei drachim, b'mifkashei rechovot, b'midbariyot u'bejungalim, v'heimarim ha'echad le'chavero, heichan lifnot, u'mahi haderech, u'ma hakivun, u'masbirim heichan lifnot, ve'la'an lifnot, ve'ech le'agia b'derech ha'mehira biyoter, ve'efo leshuv, ve'lishol adam acher, l'sham, lo ela rak b'pniya shniya yemina, misham smola or yemina, liyad habayit halavan, liyad ha'etz ha'alon, ve'hem masbirim bekolot nirgashim, behanafat yadayim betnuot rosh, l'sham, lo hasham hazeh, hasham ha'acher, kamo bepulchan kedum. Gam zo dat chadasha. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema shebarega zeh. I believe with perfect faith that at this very moment, millions of human beings are standing at crossroads and intersections, in jungles and in deserts, showing each other where to turn, what the right way is, which direction. They explain exactly where to go, what is the quickest way to get there, when to stop and ask again, there, over there, the second turn off, not the first, and from there, left or right, near the White House, by the oak tree. They explain with excited voices and with a wave of the hand and a nod of the head, there, over there, not that there, the other there, as in some ancient rite. This too is a new religion. I believe with perfect faith that at this very moment. So just two things that I want to point out in the poem, and then I want to hear your thoughts and responses to it. The one is that this act of like direction giving, he uses this language of, it's an ancient ritual. It's an ancient rite, that giving directions to people is an ancient ritual. His language in the Hebrew, gamzo dat chadasha, this is a new religion. So in the previous Midrash of Rivka Lubitch, it felt like she was offering us a new kind of faith. like a new kind of faith that's about, maybe it's not about certainty, maybe it's not about trust, but it's about like a choice to care and a choice to raise up. Yehuda Amichai, this is not a faith that's about, it doesn't seem to be about God at all. It's a different type of faith. He's offering us like a new type of faith, a new type of religion that seems to be about people. Gamzo dat chadasha, this is a new religion. And just this last line, Anima Amin B'emunah Shlema, again, you have us hearkening back to the Maimonides, to the opening of the poem, I believe with perfect faith, Sheba Rega Zeh, at this moment, you feel as if like the poem is hanging suspended on a thread, and it's like, you can go on and like one that we are suspended in the moment with him. I believe with perfect faith at this moment, like we are in the moment. And also that it's like, you're just waiting. Okay, so what's the thing you believe? You're like, it's giving, I think, an opening for both Yehuda Amichai, but also for us as the reader to say like, well, what's the thing that I believe in with perfect faith at this moment? What can I fill in at this moment? So let me pause there. I want to ask you, when you read this poem, just take a minute to look back over the poem. I'm curious to hear, is there like a phrase or an idea that stands out to you, that's striking to you, or that you would want to know more about? I'm not saying I'm going to give you all the answers on it, but like what's the phrase that you're like, oh, I want to spend a little bit more time with that phrase. So go ahead and put that in the chat. For this time, I'm going to leave the poem up. I'm not going to stop screen sharing because I just want to make sure that we all have the text. But I am looking at the chat now. This is not my translation. Yehuda Amichai is like very translated. Why the White House? From there, left or right, near the White House by the oak tree. Be'emunah shlema. Right, this phrase keeps coming up today in this session. Like, what is this emunah shlema? Ahava says that we are at a crossroads and intersections. The voluntary covenant, Rabbi Greenberg, of choice to be in covenant with the divine. Ahava, that's beautiful. You're offering us like a deep understanding of this. Like you're saying, this poem is not just about what, this poem could have been about anything. It could have been about, this poem is essentially about like people helping each other. And you're saying this poem isn't just about giving directions, but actually like it's a much deeper metaphor that in any moment it's not just about like, how do I get from A to B, but actually how do I get from A to B in my life, that we are all at these crossroads and intersections in our life, these moments of choices, and that people are there guiding people in these like really critical intersections of their life, not just like, how do I get from the white, that point A to point B. Beautiful. Thank you. Kathleen says, I'm severely dyslexic, so someone else giving me directions is useless. I have to choose to believe, choose to have faith. But I do like the house by the right, since I'm better able to visualize directions. Deb says, they explain with excited voices. Yes. There's something that feels very Israeli in this poem. It's like, you were just going on your way and all of a sudden someone's like shouting at you, no, go here, not there, not that one. And they're like yelling at you with excited voices, but they're very excited to be helping you. I've been on a number of buses and had people yelling at me about like what to do with my kid, do this, don't do this, hold your kid in that way. But that they're excited, right? That they're so eager to be participating in whatever this journey is that you're on. Okay, Carol is also asking this emunah shlema. What is a perfect faith? I wonder, is that even a real thing? Does a perfect faith exist? It's who was pointing out that the Dor Rishon, Kathleen, the Dor Rishon, that first generation, they saw God, they believed in God, they knew God, and then like several chapters later is the golden calf, right? So is perfect faith only something that we have do we only have emunah shlema, that perfect faith in Barega Hazeh, in that moment, but then in the next moment, who knows? Phyllis says, there, over there, not there, there, the there, as in some ancient right. Thank you, Phyllis. Yeah. That brings up to me like the confusion of getting from one place to another, sort of like the insufficiency of language and giving directions, as was it Kathleen that was saying, the there, over there, not there, there. So Anita also says, there, over there, not that there, the other there. Like, which way is the right way? Who knows? Mimi says, showing each other leads to new religion. Right? What is a question that I would ask is, what is the Dat Chadasha? What is the new religion in this poem? What is faith in this poem? And what is, in the Midrash that we read before, we had three very different and clear presentations of what faith is. So a question I would ask about this poem is, what is faith in this poem? What is the faith? What is the emunah shlema? What is the faith? What is the new religion? So Mimi, I think you're giving us an answer. The new religion is connecting to whatever this showing each other is. Mark says, the White House is ordinary. It means that we make choices every day as we live our ordinary life. Right? There's something so ordinary about the White House, the oak tree, the directions. But yet, there could be choices of consequences that are happening. So Phil says the sentence there, it is about the search everlasting. Maybe the ancient rite is the search. Phyllis, amazing. I was thinking that this whole poem is that the ancient rite is the act of like giving directions. The ancient rite is about like helping people, being along their path. And you're saying actually the search is the ancient rite. That's so interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah, especially in a poem that's about faith, that actually, what is this new religion? What is this ancient rite? It's the search that is the ancient rite. Is it the search, or is it the act of helping people on their search? Chris says, the poem mirrors the chaos of life when we are uncertain which direction to take, and the belief that our choices will have direction and meaning. Amazing. A much deeper meaning. Yeah. Right. So that's a great question, Deborah, how to connect the title of the poem. So Yehuda Amichai, in Patuach Segor Patuach, he has a whole section that are poems connected to the Holocaust. I think that there's a whole section. I'm just checking to see if I can find it really quickly. I think that there's sorry, I'm not finding it right on the spot, but I think there's a whole section called I Wasn't One of the 6 Million, and this is one of those poems within that section. My like on one foot answer, Deborah, without really having given it much thought, is that the Holocaust is a moment of a breaking of faith. The Holocaust, and it's like interesting to come back to the Eish Kodesh at this moment of like that we were turning to the Eish Kodesh who was writing during the Holocaust. We were getting like what was faith? What does it mean to be a religious person in faith during times of crisis? And I don't know. Part of what I see here is, and the third poem, the third midrash, which we're not actually going to get to, but you should look at it in your own time. The third midrash is also a midrash that's about faith, but it's very much like a post-Holocaust theology midrash of like, what does it mean to have faith after the Holocaust? I wasn't one of the 6 million. I am one of the people after the fact who is now like wrestling with what it means to have faith in this post-Holocaust world. What does faith look like in a world in which maybe you have a different relationship to God? So I think that's how I would begin to think about that. And that's very much connected to the theme of the last midrash of what does it mean to be in relationship to God or have faith in God after the Holocaust. And I would say another question animating the last midrash that we're not going to see is, where is God in sadness and despair and crisis? Susan said, faith that it's worthwhile to go on, to find a way to live, to put all your energy into finding a way. Oh, good. So Susan, you're answering the question, what is faith in this poem? What is the emunah shlema? What is the complete faith? The faith is about that it's worthwhile to go on, to find a way to live, to put all your energy into finding a way. Beautiful, Susan. Thank you. Okay, so Miriam says, this is bringing a quote. But why does God endure the travesties of human history foretold by the angels? What is the reason for God's patience? The rabbis offered an answer that rings with a modern sensibility. The recognition of God as God requires human consciousness. So that sounds very much like, I think, the emunah, the definition of faith in the Dor Acharon, in the last generation, that faith is about the importance of human beings recognizing God. This is how Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai read the prophetic verse. So you are witnesses, declares the Lord, then I am God. Beautiful. When you are my witnesses, declares the Lord, then I am God. Oh, that is so helpful, Miriam. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think both that's what the Midrash is saying here. Just gonna move my chat box. That would be right. That when you are my witnesses, then I am God, right? That they raise up and care for God until God becomes God and God's Torah becomes Torah. And that does, I think, very much connect to the other Yehuda Amichai poem that I just sort of talked about outside, that God creates human beings who create prayer to create God. So that's beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Okay, there's so much more to say. Shirel says, it seems to me about connection. People are standing and crossroads and they care enough to give and receive. Brings me back to the last generation and caring. Oh yeah, that's an amazing connection to make. Right, that faith in that, that's amazing, yes. So I was seeing that, the faith in the previous Midrash as being about caring for God, but it's faith that's about caring, Lishon Umnut, amazing. And here it's about, faith seems to be about caring for other people, connection with other people. Right, that's a great connection to make. Thank you for that. So I think that, so amazing. There's more comments, so I'm not going to keep reading all of them. With our last time, I'm just going to stop screen sharing for a moment. There is another Midrash that I have on the source sheet. Rather than like sort of rush to dive into another Midrash as we're closing out our 4 sessions, I would rather end by asking you a question and asking you to sort of reflect in the chat to say, you know, we've touched on a lot of different thoughts in our sessions together, from what it means to be children of faith, what it means to, like, in moments when we're not having faith, to just say mikol makom ani ma'amin, in any case I believe, to faith that's about truth, faith that's about trust, faith that's about caring for God, faith that's about caring for other people. I just want to pause now and sort of like ask you to crystallize for yourself, like, what's the thing that you want to take away from this learning? What's the idea? What's the concept? What's the person? Where are you feeling in your own faith right now? This could take a lot of forms. I'm leaving it really open-ended. Like, is there a question that you're leaving with? Is there an idea you want to take away with? Is there a journey that you've gone on? Just to go ahead and share that in the chat. What's the thing that you want to take away, that you want to remember? Just as a couple more people are writing in the chat. I'll just say, for me, I think for me that's feeling most resonant right now is I loved the thing. I love the, I mean, this isn't really from the Eish Kodesh, but really from the Shmot Rabbah, of the idea that even when we're not sure where we are in our belief, sort of the affirmation that we are believers, we're children of believers, and the permission that this Midrash from Rivka Lubitch gives us of what it means to be a children of a believer is, I'm a child of a believer, but my belief might not be the same as my parents or as my ancestors, and that I might need to do the work of defining what belief means for me, of sort of like opening and expanding the tent of belief, of emunah, to allow for different understanding, different relationships of faith, that I can be a person of faith. I just might have to shift the definition of faith a little bit. Okay, so let's just see a couple of closing thoughts here. It's hard, but so is a meaningful life. Where it says, how does faith enter our daily reality? Deborah says that there was more room for my doubt than I thought. Appreciate that, Deborah. Deb says, don't be so hard on yourself. There are so many different facets of faith, and you should be you. So Deb, that's beautiful. And I think we really see that, we saw that in the Midrash today, but also I want to say, I think we really saw that in Rabbi Nachman, that he says like, this is also an aspect of faith, and this is an aspect of faith, and the cry is an aspect of faith, that all of these things can be aspects of faith. Thank you, Deb, for that. Kathleen says, faith begins as God revealing himself to us. It continues as we say, I believe, and do our best to pass it on. Anita says, faith is there. Where? Wherever there might be at the time, right? Faith is there, not that there, the other there. Whether I'm feeling close and appreciative or angry and distanced. Faith is there. Whether I'm feeling close and appreciative or angry and distant. That's great, Anita. Thank you for making that connection to the poem. Ava says, the innateness of faith and its inheritance, but also affirming this essence of this faith, which is my person, my entire person, always. Right. So that's amazing. Yeah. Right. So that feels very connected to the Eish Kodesh of like the inheriting of faith in our DNA, but also that we have the ability to like practice our faith, draw focus and consciousness to our faith, become aware of our faith. And then connecting with the learning that we're doing today of like that faith can take different shapes. Mimi says, it is fine that my faith varies from time to time through all the generations and through Eish Kodesh, Nachman, Musar, Yehuda Amichai, right? That our faith can change. So that's a question that we keep coming back to, of like, what's the emunah shlema? Does the emunah shlema mean like I hit an emunah shlema, I hit a perfect faith, and that's what my faith looks like for all time? Or actually, can I have an emunah shlema, a perfect faith that's also like shifting all the time and looks differently in any given moment? And sometimes I'm the first generation, and sometimes I'm the third, and sometimes I'm Yehuda Amichai, and sometimes I'm the second, and that all of these are in the aspect of faith. Okay, so I wanted to say, I appreciate, especially in this sort of like wide format class in which I don't get to hear your voices and we're only sharing through the chat. I do feel like I appreciate the ways in which I feel like you really brought yourself to the class and you brought yourself into the material, and we've gotten to be in conversation with each other. And it's just, you've all said it so beautifully in the chat. I just want to, as this offering, to say everything you've said, that we shouldn't be hard on ourselves, and that we should continue the practice, as Shirel gave us the language, the connection of emunah lehitamen, to continue the practice and the work of finding space for our own faith, of finding our own language for faith, expanding our notions of faith, so that we, God forbid, that we shouldn't say that we're not believers, that we should say, I believe, but that we might have to expand what it means to say, I believe. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Rabbi Avi, for the series, for today, and for opening so many doors to talking and breathing faith. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this, and we're looking forward to seeing you in future CSP programs. Toda rabba. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.